The hammer came down with a force that sent sparks dancing across the darkened forge like fireflies in a summer meadow. And Hannah Whitmore didn't even break a sweat as she shaped the horseshoe with precision that would make any man twice her size jealous. She had been working iron since she was 12 years old, back when her father ran the smithy in their small Missouri settlement before consumption took him, and her mother decided Colorado might offer them a fresh start. Now, at 22, Hannah's arms were lean but corded with muscle, her hands calloused and steady, and her reputation in Bonanza, Colorado, was growing faster than the town itself. It was the spring of 1878, and the mining boom had brought fortune seekers from every corner of the country, all of them needing tools, horseshoes, wagon repairs, and ironwork of every kind imaginable. The official blacksmith in town, a portly man named Gerald Morrison who had inherited his shop from his uncle, couldn't keep up with the demand. He was adequate at his trade, competent enough to shoe a horse or mend a broken hinge, but when it came to the finer work, the delicate balance between strength and flexibility that made a truly exceptional piece, he fell short. Hannah had started taking on side work 6 months ago, quietly at first, just helping out a neighbor here and there. But word spread quickly in a town like Bonanza, and soon she had a steady stream of customers who sought her out specifically, willing to pay premium prices for her superior craftsmanship. She was finishing up a set of custom hinges for the new bank building when she heard boots on the wooden planks outside her mother's barn, which she had converted into a makeshift workshop. The afternoon sun slanted through the gaps in the walls, illuminating the dust motes that swirled in the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and hot metal. Hannah set down her hammer and wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of soot across her forehead. "Miss Whitmore." The voice was deep, rich like aged whiskey, with a slight Texas drawl that marked the speaker as someone from far south of Colorado. Hannah turned to find a man standing in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the spring sunshine. As her eyes adjusted, she took in his appearance with the quick assessment of someone who had learned to read people in a town where trust was a commodity as valuable as gold. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty trail coat. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and his face was sun-weathered but handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and eyes the color of Colorado spruce trees. He looked to be in his mid-20s, maybe 26 or 27, with the bearing of a man who had spent considerable time in the saddle. "That's me," Hannah replied, setting her tongs aside. "What can I do for you?" The man stepped into the forge, his spurs jingling softly with each step. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as he surveyed her workspace with evident appreciation. His gaze lingered on the hinges she had just completed, then moved to the various pieces hanging on the walls, samples of her work that ranged from delicate iron roses to heavy-duty wagon parts. "Name's Quincy Xavier," he said, extending a hand. "I run cattle about 15 miles northeast of here, up in the high country. Been hearing talk in town about a smith who can work iron like it's clay in their hands. Heard the same person could make a blade that would hold an edge through 100 head of cattle and still be sharp enough to shave with." Hannah shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the strength in his grip that he carefully modulated so as not to crush her fingers. She appreciated that, the way he treated her as an equal rather than a delicate flower who might wilt under a firm handshake. "People exaggerate," Hannah said, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. "But I do good work. What do you need?" Quincy pulled a knife from his belt and handed it to her. The blade was in poor condition, nicked and dull, the edge rolled over in places from hard use and inadequate maintenance. The handle was loose, the rivets working their way free from the tang. I need 3 good working knives, the kind that can handle field dressing game, cutting rope, and everything else a cattleman needs. I also need a new branding iron with my mark, and if you're as good as they say, I could use some specialty hooks for my tack room, strong enough to hold a full saddle indefinitely without bending. Hannah examined the knife, testing the balance and feeling the weight of it in her hand. I can do all that. The knives will take me about a week if I make them properly from scratch. The branding iron is a day's work, and the hooks may be 2 days depending on how many you need and what design you want. How much? Quincy asked, his green eyes watching her face carefully. Hannah did the math in her head, calculating materials and time. She quoted him a price that was fair but not cheap, knowing her work was worth every penny. She had learned early on that undervaluing her skills only led to people taking advantage, and she refused to apologize for her talent. Quincy didn't even blink. Done. When can you start? I can start on the branding iron tomorrow morning if you can sketch out your mark for me. The knives I will begin after I finish the job I'm working on now, which should be done by end of day. I'll do you one better, Quincy said, and there was something in his voice that made Hannah look up sharply. I'll pay you double your asking price if you'll come out to my ranch and set up a forge there. I need someone on hand for repairs and new work. The nearest decent smith is Morrison, and no offense to the man, but I've seen his work and it doesn't compare to yours. I watched you through that gap in the wall for the last 5 minutes before I announced myself. Saw you working that iron like it was dancing to music only you could hear. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge. You were watching me. I was making sure the rumors were true before I made my offer, Quincy said, and he had the grace to look slightly abashed. Didn't mean any disrespect by it. But Miss Whitmore, I'm running a growing operation up in those hills. I've got 12 hands working for me and we're constantly needing repairs, new shoes for the horses, tools fixed or made new. Having you on site would save me time and money in the long run, even at double your rates. I have my mother to think about, Hannah said slowly, though her mind was already turning over the possibilities. The money would be substantial, enough to set them up comfortably, and maybe even allow her to expand her operation. But leaving town, going to live on a ranch with a man she had just met, that would set tongues wagging. Bring her with you, Quincy said immediately. I've got a foreman's cabin that's been sitting empty since my last foreman decided to try his luck in the silver mines and never came back. It's a 2-room place, small but solid, with a good stove and a view of the mountains that would take your breath away. Your mother would be welcome, and I'd pay you both a fair wage. She could help my cook with the hands' meals if she was willing, or she could just enjoy not having to work so hard for a while. Hannah studied him carefully, looking for any sign of impropriety or hidden motives, but Quincy's face was open, earnest, and his offer seemed genuine. More than that, there was something about him that drew her interest, a combination of respect for her abilities and an intensity in the way he looked at her that made her pulse quicken. Let me talk to my mother, Hannah said finally. Come back tomorrow afternoon and I'll have an answer for you. Quincy's face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to genuinely striking. Fair enough. I'll be here at 3 o'clock tomorrow, and I'll bring the sketch of my brand mark whether you agree to come to the ranch or not. Either way, I want you to do the work. He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her in a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and charming. Miss Whitmore, it's been a genuine pleasure meeting you. After he left, Hannah stood in her forge for a long moment, staring at the doorway where he had disappeared. Then she shook herself and returned to her work on the hinges. But her mind kept drifting back to green eyes and a Texas drawl, and an offer that could change everything. That evening, over a simple dinner of beans and cornbread in their small house on the edge of town, Hannah laid out Quincy's proposition to her mother. Margaret Whitmore was a slender woman in her mid-40s who had aged prematurely from worry and hard work, but her eyes were still sharp and her mind sharper still. "Tell me about this man," Margaret said, setting down her spoon. "Not just what he offered, but what your gut tells you about him." Hannah considered the question carefully. "He seems honest, direct. He appreciates good work and is willing to pay for it. He watched me working before he introduced himself, which should probably bother me more than it does, but he was straightforward about it when I called him on it. And—" her mother prompted, a knowing look in her eyes. "And he's handsome," Hannah admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. "But that's not why I'm considering his offer. Mama, the money would be significant. We could save up enough to maybe buy our own property someday, build a proper forge instead of working out of a converted barn." Margaret reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Hannah, my girl, you've been taking care of me since your father died, putting your own life on hold to make sure we had a roof over our heads and food on the table. You're 22 years old and you should be thinking about your own future, maybe courting, getting married, having babies of your own someday." "I haven't met anyone in Bonanza who interests me that way," Hannah said quietly. "Most of the men here either resent me for being better at smithing than they are, or they want me to give it up and be a proper housewife. I won't do that, Mama. This is who I am." "I know, sweetheart. Your father would be so proud of you, the way you've taken his teachings and made them your own, surpassing even what he could do." Margaret squeezed her hand. "If you want my honest opinion, I think we should take this Quincy Xavier up on his offer. It sounds like an adventure, and Lord knows we could use some of that in our lives. Besides, I'm curious to meet this man who managed to catch your attention." The next afternoon, Quincy returned at exactly 3 o'clock, as punctual as a railroad schedule. He brought the sketch of his brand mark, a stylized QX that would be distinctive and clear when burned into cowhide. He also brought a basket covered with a checkered cloth, which he presented to Margaret with a courtly bow. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you'll forgive the presumption, but my cook, Lewis, packed some things for you. Fresh bread, some preserves, and a few other items. He's excited at the prospect of having another skilled hand in the kitchen if you decide to join us at the ranch." Margaret accepted the basket with a pleased smile. "Mr. Xavier, you're either very confident or very good at reading people." "A bit of both, madam," Quincy admitted with a grin. "So, Miss Whitmore, what's your answer?" Hannah had spent the morning finishing the hinges for the bank and organizing her tools. She had made her decision in the quiet hours before dawn, lying in her narrow bed and thinking about opportunity and risk, and the way Quincy's eyes had lit up when he talked about his ranch. "We'll come," she said, "but I have conditions. I keep my own workspace and I'm not to be disturbed when I'm working unless it's an emergency. I set my own hours and take the jobs I choose to take, and my mother and I maintain our own living space. We're employees, not charity cases." "Agreed on all counts," Quincy said without hesitation. "I'll have some of my hands come into town tomorrow to help transport your tools and equipment. We'll set up a proper forge near the main barn with good ventilation and plenty of room for you to work. How soon can you be ready to move?" 3 days, Hannah said. "I have a few outstanding obligations I need to finish up, and we'll need to arrange things with our landlord here." "Take a week if you need it," Quincy said. "I want this done right, not rushed." They settled on 5 days, which gave Hannah time to complete her current projects and say goodbye to the few friends she had made in Bonanza. Word spread quickly that she was leaving town to work at the Xavier Ranch, and the reactions were mixed. Some people, particularly other women, were scandalized that an unmarried woman would go live on a ranch with a bachelor rancher. Others, mostly her customers, were disappointed to lose access to her skills, but understood the opportunity was too good to pass up. Gerald Morrison, the town blacksmith, stopped by her forge on her last day in town. He was red-faced and sweating, as he usually was, but his expression was more resigned than angry. "Can't say I'm happy to see you go," he said bluntly. "You've been taking business that should have been mine." "You could have improved your skills," Hannah replied, not unkindly. "I was willing to show you some of my techniques." Morrison shook his head. "Pride's a funny thing, Miss Whitmore. I couldn't bring myself to take lessons from a woman half my age, even though I knew you were better than me." "That's my failing, not yours." He extended his hand. "Good luck out there. Xavier's a good man from what I hear, treats his people fair." Hannah shook his hand, appreciating the gesture even if it had taken her departure to prompt it. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I hope your business thrives." On the morning of the 5th day, Quincy arrived with a wagon and two of his ranch hands, both weathered cowboys in their 30s who treated Hannah and her mother with polite respect. They loaded up her tools with careful attention to her instructions about which pieces were delicate and which could handle rough handling. Hannah's anvil alone took 2 men to lift, the heavy iron block that was the centerpiece of any forge. The ride out to the Xavier Ranch took about 3 hours, following a rough trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen, climbing steadily into the high country where the air was thinner and cleaner than in town. Quincy rode alongside the wagon on a handsome bay gelding, pointing out landmarks and explaining the boundaries of his property. "I've got about 2,000 acres, most of it grazing land," he told them. "The herd's around 500 head right now, but I'm building toward 1,000. The trick is keeping them through the winter, which gets brutal up here. We lose some every year, but the ones that survive grow strong on the mountain grass come spring." As they crested a final rise, the ranch spread out before them in a valley cupped between 2 ridges. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney, smoke curling from it into the clear blue sky. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a smokehouse. A creek ran through the property, its water sparkling in the midday sun. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring warmth beginning to green the valleys. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, and Hannah had to agree. Quincy's face showed unmistakable pride. "Built most of it myself over the last 4 years. Started with just the main house and a small barn and added on as I could afford it. The land itself I bought from a prospector who decided mining wasn't for him." He showed them to the foreman's cabin first, a neat structure set slightly apart from the main buildings. True to his word, it had 2 rooms, a main living area with a small kitchen, and a bedroom with 2 narrow beds. The furniture was simple but well made, and someone had taken the time to clean thoroughly and stock the kitchen with basic supplies. "Lewis, my cook, took it upon himself to make sure you had what you needed," Quincy explained. "If there's anything else you require, just let me know. There's a root cellar out back for keeping things cool, and water from the creek is good for drinking, though we boil it first to be safe." After giving them time to settle their personal belongings, Quincy led Hannah to the forge site he had prepared. It was better than she had dared hope, a 3-sided structure with a solid roof, open on one side for ventilation and light. There was already a brick forge bed built up to a comfortable working height, and a sturdy workbench ran along one wall. Her anvil would sit perfectly in the center of the space. "I had my men build this over the winter," Quincy said. "I was hoping I could convince you to come, so I wanted to be prepared. The chimney draws well, we tested it. And see that handle there? That's connected to a bellows system, better than a foot pump. One of my hands used to work in a factory back east and he rigged it up." Hannah walked around the space, running her hands over the workbench, examining the forge bed, testing the bellows. Everything was quality construction, built by people who understood what a smith needed. She felt something tighten in her chest, a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. No one had ever done something like this for her before, anticipated her needs and prepared for them without being asked. "This is perfect," she said, and was mortified when her voice came out thick with tears. "Thank you, Quincy." He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was soft, open in a way that made her heart skip. "You haven't even seen the best part yet." He led her around to the back of the structure, where a lean-to addition held neat racks for tools, bins for coal and coke, and a water trough fed by a clever system of pipes from the creek. But what caught her attention was the iron rose mounted on the back wall, clearly one of her own pieces that she had sold in Bonanza months ago. "I bought that in January," Quincy admitted. "Saw it in Morrison's shop window. He said a local smith had made it, but he wouldn't tell me who. It wasn't until I started asking around about finding a really good iron worker that people directed me to you. When I saw you working and recognized your style, I knew I had to have you come here." Hannah reached out to touch the rose, its petals frozen in iron but somehow still conveying the delicate beauty of the living flower. "You bought this in January, but you didn't come find me until last week." "I was working up my nerve," Quincy said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Seems silly now, but I was worried you'd turn me down flat. A woman with your skill could work anywhere for anyone. Why would you choose to come out to a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a cattleman who doesn't know the first thing about smithing?" "Because you appreciate good work," Hannah said simply. "Because you were willing to pay what it's worth. And because you built me a forge before you even knew if I'd say yes." They stood there for a moment, close enough that Hannah could smell the combination of leather and sage that clung to him, could see the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Then one of the ranch hands called for Quincy, something about a problem with a fence line, and the moment broke. "I'll let you get settled," Quincy said, stepping back. "Tomorrow you can start setting up your forge properly. No rush on beginning work until you're ready. Tonight, come to the main house for dinner. Lewis is making something special to welcome you and your mother." That evening, gathered around a long table in Quincy's main house with the ranch hands and Lewis, a cheerful Mexican man in his 50s who clearly ruled the kitchen with an iron fist, Hannah began to understand what life at the ranch would be like. The men were rough around the edges but respectful, and they seemed genuinely excited to have a skilled smith on site. They peppered her with questions about what she could make and fix, and she found herself laughing at their enthusiasm. Quincy sat at the head of the table, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. Their eyes met across the length of the table more than once, and each time Hannah felt that same flutter in her chest, that sense of standing on the edge of something significant. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Hannah set up her forge, arranging her tools exactly as she wanted them, testing the bellows and the draw of the chimney, getting a feel for the space. The first project Quincy gave her was the branding iron with his mark, and she took special care with it, making sure the letters would sear cleanly, and the handle would stay cool even when the business end was red hot. When she presented it to him, he tested it on a piece of scrap wood first, and the mark came out perfect, clean lines with no blurring. "You could forge iron better than any blacksmith I've ever met," Quincy said, examining the brand with evident admiration. "Hell, better than any smith I've heard of, man or woman." "I just pay attention to the details," Hannah said, but she was pleased by the compliment. "Name your price," Quincy said suddenly, looking up at her with those intense green eyes. "For anything you make, any work you do, name your price." "You're worth it." Hannah felt her breath catch. "You're already paying me double my usual rates. And it's still not enough for work of this quality. I'm serious, Hannah. Don't undersell yourself. Not here, not with me, not ever." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low drawl did strange things to her equilibrium. "Quincy," she said, testing out the intimacy of using his name as well, "you're making it very hard for me to maintain professional distance." "Good," he said, and there was no mistaking the heat in his gaze. "Because I've been thinking about you from the moment I saw you in that forge, and professional distance is the last thing I want." "I work for you," Hannah pointed out, even as her heart raced. "So quit," Quincy said. "Or don't." "I don't care. All I know is that I've never met anyone like you, Hannah Whitmore. You're strong and talented, and you don't apologize for being exceptional. I've been around the West, from Texas to Montana, and I've never encountered a woman who could match you." "You barely know me," Hannah protested, but it was weak. "Then let me get to know you better." Quincy moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night, just the two of us. Not as employer and employee, but as a man and a woman who are interested in each other. Tell me I'm not imagining this thing between us." Hannah looked up at him, at the hope and vulnerability in his expression, and made her decision. "You're not imagining it, and yes, I'll have dinner with you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the mountains. Their courtship, if it could be called that, progressed with a speed that would have scandalized people back in Bonanza, but felt natural in the contained world of the ranch. They talked for hours, sitting on the porch of the main house after the day's work was done, sharing stories of their pasts and their dreams for the future. Hannah learned that Quincy had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. He had struck out on his own at 19 after his father died, and his oldest brother inherited the family property, determined to build something that was entirely his. "I worked as a drover for 3 years, saving every penny," he told her. "Drove cattle from Texas to Kansas, Kansas to Wyoming, sleeping on the ground and eating dust. But I learned the business, learned what made a ranch succeed or fail. When I had enough saved, I came to Colorado because the land was cheaper here and there was room to grow." Hannah told him about her father's forge, about learning the trade at his side from the time she was old enough to hold a hammer safely. "He never treated me like I couldn't do it, because I was a girl," she said. "He just taught me the same way he would have taught a son. When he got sick, I kept the forge running. Mama begged me to let it go to find other work, but I couldn't. It was the last piece of him I had." "He'd be proud of you," Quincy said softly. "The way you've taken his legacy and made it into something even greater." As spring deepened into early summer, Hannah found herself falling for Quincy in a way she had never experienced before. It wasn't just his looks, though she certainly appreciated those, or his respect for her skills, though that mattered immensely. It was the way he listened when she talked, really listened, remembering details and following up on things she had mentioned days before. It was the way he brought her coffee in the morning when he knew she'd been up late working on a difficult piece. It was the quiet competence with which he ran his ranch, firm but fair with his hands, devoted to the animals in his care. She was working on the set of knives he had originally commissioned, taking her time to get them exactly right. when he came to her forge one afternoon in mid-June. He had been out riding the range, checking on the herd, and there was dust on his clothes and sweat on his brow. "Can you take a break?" he asked. "There's something I want to show you." Hannah banked her forge and followed him to where his horse was tied. He swung into the saddle and then offered her his hand, pulling her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against her palms. They rode up into the hills above the ranch, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of aspen that were fully leafed out now, their leaves fluttering silver green in the breeze. Eventually, they emerged into a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers: purple lupine, yellow arnica, white columbine. The view stretched for miles, mountains in every direction, the ranch laid out below like a toy set. Quincy dismounted and helped her down, then led her to a flat rock that overlooked the valley. "This is my favorite spot on the whole property," he said. "I come up here when I need to think, to remember why I'm working so hard." They sat together on the sun-warmed stone, shoulders touching. Hannah could feel the significance of the moment, the weight of something unspoken hanging between them. "Hannah," Quincy said finally, turning to face her, "I know we haven't known each other long. It's been barely 2 months since I walked into your forge in Bonanza. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about this, about us." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Quincy, let me finish," he said, taking her hands in his. His palms were calloused from years of hard work, warm and steady. "I'm not good with fancy words. I'm a cattleman, plain and simple. But what I feel for you isn't plain or simple at all. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met. You're talented and strong and beautiful, and when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you in it." "I feel the same way," Hannah whispered. "It scares me how much I feel for you, how fast it happened. But it's real, Quincy. What's between us is real." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but pulling away was the furthest thing from her mind. When his lips met hers, it was like the completion of a circuit, energy flowing between them that made every nerve in her body light up. The kiss was tender at first, then deepening as she pressed closer to him, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right, the way you deserve, but I also want you to know that my intentions are serious. I'm not looking for a passing fancy or a temporary arrangement. When I'm ready to ask you to be my wife, and I will ask, I want you to know it comes from a place of absolute certainty." "When you're ready?" Hannah asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "And when do you think that might be?" "When I'm sure you feel the same way," Quincy said. "When I'm confident that you're not going to wake up one day and realize you could do better than a Colorado cattleman who smells like cows more often than not." Hannah laughed and kissed him again. "You're ridiculous. And for the record, I happen to like the way you smell." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, talking and kissing and making plans. Quincy told her about his hopes for the ranch, how he wanted to make it one of the premier cattle operations in Colorado. Hannah shared her dreams of having her own forge, a real one with apprentices she could teach, passing on the knowledge her father had given her. "You could do that here," Quincy said. "We could build you whatever kind of forge you wanted, as big as you needed. Train as many apprentices as you could handle. The ranch would support it, and you'd be building something that could outlast both of us." The idea took root in Hannah's mind, growing and branching out into possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. A real legacy, not just surviving but thriving, creating something that mattered. Over the next few weeks, their relationship became an open secret on the ranch. Margaret watched with approval, clearly delighted to see her daughter happy. Louis made knowing comments about romance and spring and young people falling in love. The ranch hands teased Quincy good-naturedly, telling him he'd better marry Hannah soon before some other smart man snatched her up. Hannah continued her work, and her reputation spread beyond the ranch. Ranchers from neighboring properties began bringing her business, willing to ride for hours to get access to her skills. She made everything from intricate iron gates to simple horseshoes, each piece bearing the mark of her exceptional craftsmanship. The money she earned was more than she had ever made in Bonanza, and she was able to send some back to friends in town who had helped her and her mother in their early days there. One evening in late July, as the summer heat baked the high country and thunderstorms rolled through the mountains in the afternoons, Quincy asked Hannah to walk with him down to the creek. They followed the water upstream to a spot where it pooled into a deep swimming hole, surrounded by willows that provided privacy from the ranch buildings. "I've been thinking," Quincy said, skipping stones across the pool's surface, "about the future, about what I want from life." "And what do you want?" Hannah asked, settling onto a fallen log. Quincy turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "You," he said simply. "I want you, Hannah, not just as the woman I'm courting, but as my wife, my partner in every sense of the word. I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, the last rays of sunlight caught on a simple gold band with a small diamond set in it, nothing ostentatious but clearly chosen with care. "I rode into Denver last week," Quincy said, dropping to one knee in front of her. "Told the jeweler there that I needed a ring for the most amazing woman in Colorado, maybe in the whole West. He showed me dozens of options, but this one felt right. Simple and elegant, strong and beautiful like you." Tears were streaming down Hannah's face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Quincy Xavier, Hannah Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" "Yes," Hannah said, the word coming out in a sob. "Yes, of course, yes." Quincy slipped the ring onto her finger and then stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. She clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the intensity of her joy. They were married 6 weeks later, in early September, when the aspen trees were beginning to turn gold, and the air had that particular crystalline quality that came with the approach of autumn. The ceremony was held in the meadow where Quincy had first kissed her, with a traveling preacher officiating and everyone from the ranch in attendance. Several neighboring ranchers came as well, along with a few people from Bonanza who had made the journey out to celebrate. Hannah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Margaret had sewn for her, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to Hannah's grandmother. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and when Quincy saw her walking toward him across the flower-studded grass, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They exchanged vows in front of their friends and family, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever challenges life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her with such tenderness that more than one rough cowboy had to wipe his eyes. The celebration that followed was lively and joyous, with music and dancing, and a feast that Louis had been preparing for days. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Hannah found herself swaying in her husband's arms to a fiddle tune played by one of the ranch hands, feeling happier than she had ever thought possible. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked, his lips close to her ear. About how my life has changed, Hannah said. A year ago, I was struggling to make ends meet in Bonanza, working out of a converted barn and wondering if I'd ever find someone who could accept all of me, the smithing and the strength and everything else. And now I'm here, married to a man I love desperately, with a forge of my own and a future that looks brighter than I ever dared dream. I'm the lucky one, Quincy said. You could forge iron better than any blacksmith in Colorado. I said, name your price, you're worth it. But the truth is, there's no price that could match your value. You're priceless, Hannah Xavier. The sound of her new name on his lips sent a thrill through her. Say it again. Hannah Xavier, he murmured and kissed her softly. My wife, my love, my partner in everything. They spent their wedding night in the main house, which was now officially their home together. Margaret had moved to the foreman's cabin permanently, claiming she enjoyed the quiet and the independence. The house felt different now, charged with possibility and promise. Quincy was gentle and passionate, and Hannah discovered that the fire between them in conversation and companionship translated into their physical relationship as well. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Hannah continued her forge work, taking on increasingly ambitious projects. She designed and built an elaborate iron gate for the ranch entrance, with the QX brand worked into the design along with imagery of mountains and cattle. When it was installed, people rode out just to see it, marveling at the artistry. Quincy expanded his herd with Hannah's input, her practical mind helping him think through the logistics of growth and sustainability. They made a formidable team, his knowledge of cattle and land management combining with her problem-solving abilities and attention to detail. The ranch prospered, gaining a reputation not just for quality beef, but for the exceptional ironwork that came from its forge. In the spring of 1879, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and trepidation. She worried about how pregnancy would affect her ability to work, whether she would have to give up her forge, at least temporarily. Quincy allayed her fears immediately. "We'll figure it out together," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "You work as long as you're comfortable working, and when you need to step back, we'll hire someone to handle the basic repairs. The specialized work can wait until you're ready to return to it." Margaret was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. Lewis immediately began planning meals designed to keep Hannah and the baby healthy. The ranch hands treated her like she was made of spun glass, which annoyed her until Quincy explained that they were just excited and didn't quite know how to express it. Hannah worked at her forge through most of her pregnancy, adjusting her methods as her body changed. She found she had to stand differently to accommodate her growing belly, and by the 7th month, she could no longer work for long stretches without needing to sit down. But she continued taking commissions, particularly enjoying the opportunity to create decorative pieces as well as functional ones. In October of 1879, after a labor that lasted most of a day and left her exhausted but triumphant, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Daniel Xavier after both of their fathers. Quincy held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "He's perfect," Quincy breathed. "Hannah, you're amazing. Look at what we made together." Those early months of parenthood were challenging in ways Hannah hadn't anticipated. James was a fussy baby who didn't sleep well and seemed to need constant attention. Between caring for him and trying to maintain at least some of her forge work, Hannah was exhausted. But Quincy was a devoted father, taking on nighttime feedings whenever possible, walking the floor with James when he cried, changing diapers without complaint. Margaret was an enormous help, stepping in to watch James when Hannah needed to work or simply to sleep. Lewis made himself useful in unexpected ways, revealing that he had raised 6 children of his own back in Mexico before coming north, and his calm, experienced presence was often exactly what Hannah needed when she felt overwhelmed. By the time James was 6 months old, Hannah had worked out a system that allowed her to return to her forge more regularly. She set up a cradle in her workshop where James could sleep or play, while she worked on projects that didn't require her absolute concentration. The baby seemed fascinated by the forge, watching the dancing sparks with wide eyes, and Hannah told Quincy that their son would probably grow up to be a smith himself. Or a cattleman, Quincy countered. Or maybe both. Maybe he'll run the ranch and the forge together, combining both sides of his heritage. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch continued to grow, and Hannah's forge became famous throughout Colorado and even beyond. She took on 2 apprentices, young men from Bonanza who were eager to learn her techniques and who showed real aptitude for the work. She taught them the way her father had taught her, with patience and high standards and an insistence on excellence. In 1881, Hannah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Ellen. She was an easier baby than James had been, sunny and cheerful from the start. James, now almost 2, was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Quincy proved to be as devoted a father to Grace as he was to James, spending hours playing with both children, teaching them about the ranch and the cattle, telling them stories about the West and their family history. Watching him with their children made Hannah fall in love with him all over again, seeing new dimensions to the man she had married. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep and the ranch had settled into nighttime quiet, Hannah and Quincy sat on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. "You ever regret it?" Quincy asked quietly. "Leaving Bonanza, coming out here, tying your life to mine?" Hannah turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression that he rarely showed to anyone else. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This life we've built, Quincy, it's better than anything I could have imagined for myself. I have work that fulfills me, children who bring me joy, a partner who respects and loves me. How could I regret any of that? I just want to make sure you're happy," Quincy said. "That you don't feel like you gave up too much." "I didn't give up anything," Hannah said. "I gained everything. You gave me the space and the support to be fully myself, to be both a smith and a wife and a mother. You know how rare that is. Most men would have insisted I choose, but you never did. You built me a forge before you even knew if I'd come because you valued my work that much. You could forge iron better than any blacksmith I'd ever seen," Quincy said, echoing the words from their first meeting. "I said name your price, you're worth it. I meant every word, Hannah, then and now." "And I named my price," Hannah said, kissing him softly. "You, this life, this family. That was always what I wanted, even before I knew I wanted it." As their children grew, the ranch became a place known not just for its cattle and its ironwork, but for the family that ran it. The Xaviers were respected throughout the region, Quincy for his fair dealing and business acumen, Hannah for her exceptional skills and her willingness to teach others. Together they embodied a partnership that was rare in the West, where traditional roles were often rigidly enforced. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved both the cattle and the forge, spending time with his father riding the range and with his mother learning to work iron. Grace was more bookish, teaching herself to read at an early age from the small library Quincy and Hannah had accumulated, but she also showed an interest in the cattle business, asking shrewd questions about breeding and management that impressed her father. In 1884, Hannah gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel. He was the most adventurous of their children, constantly getting into mischief and exploring every corner of the ranch. Quincy joked that Samuel would either grow up to be a scout or an outlaw. There was no middle ground. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons, of cattle drives and forge work, of children growing and learning, of a marriage that deepened and matured into something unshakable. They faced challenges, of course harsh winters that took their toll on the herd, a bout of illness that swept through the ranch one spring, the normal trials of raising children and running a business. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other, and from the community they had built around them. Margaret lived to see all three of her grandchildren reach school age, a contented grandmother who delighted in spoiling them and telling them stories about their mother as a child. When she passed peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1886, it was a loss that touched the entire ranch. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the valley, where she could watch over the family she had loved so much. Hannah took her mother's death hard, but Quincy was there for her through the grief, holding her when she cried, listening when she needed to talk about her memories. His quiet strength helped her through those dark months, reminding her that loss was part of life but so was love, and the love they shared was strong enough to carry them through anything. By 1890, the Xavier Ranch was one of the most successful operations in Colorado. The herd had grown to nearly 1,500 head, and Hannah's forge employed 4 full-time smiths in addition to herself. James, at 11, was already a skilled apprentice, creating pieces that showed real artistry. Grace, at 9, had begun keeping the ranch's books, her mathematical mind perfect for tracking expenses and income. Samuel, at 6, was still figuring out where his interests lay, but he showed promise in everything he tried. On their 12th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Hannah back to the meadow where they had first kissed, where they had been married, where so much of their life together had begun. The children were with Louis for the afternoon, and it was just the two of them, like it had been in those early days. 12 years, Quincy said, pulling her close. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I walked into your forge in Bonanza, and sometimes it feels like I've known you my entire life. Both things are true, Hannah said, resting her head on his shoulder. We packed a lot of living into these years. Do you remember what I said to you that first day? Quincy asked. About your ironwork. You said I could forge iron better than any blacksmith, Hannah replied, and you told me to name my price that I was worth it. You've exceeded even that high praise, Quincy said. Your work is known throughout the West now. People commission pieces from you months in advance. You've trained apprentices who have gone on to set up their own forges. You've built something remarkable, Hannah. We've built something remarkable, Hannah corrected. This ranch, our family, our life together. None of it would exist without both of us. Quincy kissed her, and it still had the power to make her pulse race, even after 12 years of marriage. I love you, he said. More than I did on our wedding day, more than I did yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. That's quite a claim, Hannah teased. It's the truth, Quincy said seriously. Every day with you makes me love you more. Every challenge we face together, every joy we share, every moment of this life we're living, it all adds up to something bigger than I ever thought possible. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming emotion. I love you too. So much that sometimes I can't find words big enough to contain it. They stayed in the meadow until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, talking about their children, their plans for the ranch, their dreams for the future. When they finally rode back down to the ranch, Hannah felt grateful beyond measure for the path her life had taken, for the cowboy who had walked into her forge one spring day and changed everything. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of work and family, of growth and change. James grew into a young man who combined his father's ranching skills with his mother's artistry in iron, creating innovative tools and equipment for the ranch. Grace studied business and eventually took over much of the ranch's financial management, her sharp mind spotting opportunities for expansion that might have been missed otherwise. Samuel found his calling as a horse trainer, with a gift for working with difficult animals that bordered on magical. By 1895, Quincy and Hannah were in their early 40s, with nearly 17 years of marriage behind them. The ranch had become something of a legend in Colorado, a model of what could be achieved through hard work, innovation, and partnership. Hannah's forge was now a separate enterprise from the ranch itself, though still located on Xavier property, employing a dozen smiths and taking commissions from across the West. One spring evening, as they sat on their porch watching their grown children work with the hands on various ranch projects, Quincy took Hannah's hand and laced his fingers through hers. "I was thinking about the forge today," he said. "About how you've built it into something that will outlast us both. Those apprentices you trained, they're training their own apprentices now. Your techniques, your standards of excellence, they're spreading across the West. That's a legacy, Hannah." "Our legacy," Hannah said. "I couldn't have done any of it without your support, without you believing in me enough to build me that first forge, to give me the space and freedom to develop my skills. Do you remember what I told you that day you finished my branding iron?" Quincy asked. "I said you could forge iron better than any blacksmith I'd met. I told you to name your price, that you were worth it." "I remember," Hannah said softly. "I still mean it," Quincy said. "Every word. You've proven your worth 1,000 times over, not just in your work but in every aspect of your life. You're an exceptional smith, a devoted mother, a brilliant businesswoman, and the best partner a man could ask for." Hannah turned to kiss him, still feeling that spark that had been there from the beginning. "You're not so bad yourself, cowboy." Quincy laughed and pulled her closer. "We've had a good run, haven't we? Built something that matters, raised children who are going to take what we've started and make it even better." "We're not done yet," Hannah pointed out. "We've got plenty of years left to keep building, keep growing." "True enough," Quincy agreed. "Though I have to admit, I'm looking forward to eventually stepping back a bit, letting the kids take over more of the day-to-day work. Spending more time with just you, maybe doing some traveling, seeing parts of the West we've never visited." "That sounds wonderful," Hannah said, imagining them exploring together, experiencing new places while knowing they had a home to return to, a life they had built together that would endure. As the sun set over the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a struggling smith in Bonanza to the head of a thriving forge operation, from a woman alone to the matriarch of a growing family, she had traveled far. And through it all, Quincy had been at her side, supporting her, challenging her, loving her with a devotion that never wavered. The years continued their steady march, bringing new grandchildren as their children married and started families of their own. James married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring property, a strong woman named Catherine who shared his love of both cattle and craftsmanship. Grace married a lawyer from Denver who appreciated her brilliant mind and supported her continued involvement in the family business. Samuel married a schoolteacher who helped establish a one-room schoolhouse on Xavier land, ensuring that all the children in the area had access to education. By the turn of the century, Quincy and Hannah were grandparents to 8 grandchildren, with more likely on the way. The ranch had grown to encompass over 5,000 acres, and the forge employed nearly 20 smiths. They had built an empire, but more importantly, they had built a family and a community that would carry on their values and their work long after they were gone. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children threw them a celebration that drew people from all across Colorado. The meadow where they had married was filled with friends and family, with music and laughter, with toasts to their enduring love and partnership. As Hannah looked around at the faces of the people they had touched, the lives they had influenced, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and joy. Quincy pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor as the sun began to set, holding her close as they swayed to a waltz. He was 51 now, his dark hair threaded with silver, lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Hannah, he was as handsome as the day he had walked into her forge, and the love in his eyes had only deepened with time. 25 years, Quincy murmured, and I love you more today than I did on our wedding day. You say that every anniversary, Hannah teased. Because it's true every anniversary, Quincy replied. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah Xavier. Building this ranch, raising our children, spending every day with you, it's been the greatest adventure of my life. Mine too, Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. When you first came to me and said I could forge iron better than any blacksmith, when you told me to name my price because I was worth it, I don't think either of us knew where it would lead, but I wouldn't change a single thing. Not one thing, Quincy asked with a smile. Well, maybe I would have kissed you sooner, Hannah admitted, making him laugh. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by the family and the community they had built, secure in the knowledge that their love had created something that would endure. The ranch would continue, the forge would continue. Their children and grandchildren would carry on the legacy of excellence and partnership that they had established. In the years that followed, as they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations and let their children take over more responsibility, Quincy and Hannah found new ways to enjoy their life together. They took that trip out west that they had talked about, traveling to California to see the ocean for the first time. They spent long hours in their garden, which Hannah had cultivated over the years, growing vegetables and flowers with the same attention to detail she brought to her forge work. But Hannah never completely stopped smithing. Even in her 60s, she could be found in the forge, teaching a new generation of apprentices or working on special commissions that required her particular expertise. Her hands might have been more gnarled with age, her back not as straight as it once was, but her eye was still sharp and her skill undiminished. Quincy continued to ride the range well into his 60s as well, checking on the cattle and the land he loved so much. He and Hannah would often ride out together, retracing the paths they had followed in their youth, telling each other stories they had shared 100 times before but never tired of hearing. On a warm summer evening in 1912, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Hannah took Quincy's hand and squeezed it gently. They were both in their late 60s now, their hair white, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. "Do you know what I was thinking about today?" Hannah asked. "Tell me," Quincy said, his voice still rich despite the years. "About that first day you came to my forge in Bonanza, about how nervous I was and how you watched me work before introducing yourself. About how you told me I could forge iron better than any blacksmith and that I should name my price because I was worth it. The truest words I ever spoke," Quincy said. "You changed my life that day," Hannah continued. "You gave me opportunities I never would have had otherwise." But more than that, you gave me love and partnership and a family that fills me with pride every single day. You're the one who changed everything, Quincy countered. You took a cattleman who was good at what he did and helped him build something truly extraordinary. This ranch, our life together, our children and grandchildren, all of it exists because of your strength and your vision and your willingness to take a chance on me. We took a chance on each other, Hannah said, and we built a life that exceeded our wildest dreams. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they sat together in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts intertwined. Their story had become part of the legend of the West, the tale of the smith who could work iron better than anyone and the cowboy who recognized her worth. But to them, it was simply their life, the greatest adventure two people could share, and they were grateful for every moment of it. The Xavier Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the partnership between Quincy and Hannah, between vision and skill, between respect and love. And in the forge that Hannah had built, where Smith still created works of art and utility from iron and fire, her techniques were still taught, her standards still upheld, her legacy still burning bright. In the end, she had not only forged iron better than any blacksmith, she had forged a life of purpose and passion, of family and achievement, of love that endured through all the years and challenges the West could throw at it. And that, more than any piece of ironwork, no matter how beautiful, was her greatest masterpiece.